A dog finds a baby in the trash and takes him to the hospital. The doctor was horrified when Rusty is an old dog with sparse fur, faded over time, and eyes heavy with sorrow. Once he was the pride of a happy family, but everything changed on a stormy night. That storm not only took away the warm home, but also took away the beloved owner, leaving Rusty in utter loneliness, lost in the vast world without knowing where to find support. Although he is old, Rusty still retains his gentle and loyal nature. He never bothers anyone, just quietly walks through each small street, seeking gentle glances and soft caresses. In his heart, the longing to be loved never fades. Every time he sits curled up by the roadside, Rusty only wishes for one thing: someone would stop, stroke him, and call his name as if he were still a part of someone's family. But in reality, a stray life is not easy for an old dog. He has nowhere to go, no one to share joys and sorrows with, only long, lonely nights, the wind blowing through the empty alleys. Rusty dreams of a home, dreams of a family, but in that moment, he feels helpless. He couldn't take care of himself, couldn't create a place to belong, even though with each passing day, that longing grew deeper. However, Rusty remains an indispensable part of the small community in the town of Oak Brook. This town, with its small streets and simple houses, is a place where everyone knows each other and always has simple yet heartwarming stories to share. Though living a wandering life, Rusty was always loved like a loyal friend to everyone. The kind and gentle people of Oak Brook always offered him scraps of food and gentle pats whenever he appeared. But still, deep in his heart, Rusty felt that something was missing. A place called home, a real family to belong to love and be loved completely. One cold winter night, as darkness enveloped the town of Oak Brook and the cold wind swept through the silent streets, Rusty wandered as usual, searching for a bit of food to chase away the chill. On nights like this, the dim lights of the windows in the houses are the only things that bring a sense of warmth, but he can only stand from afar, watching. No one needs an old dog like Rusty. Suddenly, amidst the stillness, a faint cry broke the silence of the night. The cry was strange, fragile, like a call. Rusty stopped in his tracks, ears perked up, eyes wide open in confusion. Where is that crying coming from? He listened more closely, and when he realized it was coming from a trash can by the roadside, Rusty didn't hesitate. Despite being hungry and tired, he quickly walked towards the source of the sound, his heart filled with worry. As he approached, Rusty stopped, his old eyes shining into the trash can. At first, he only saw scraps of trash and discarded bottles, but the crying grew louder, as if calling him, urging him to act. And then, when he bent down, Rusty discovered something unbelievable. A newborn baby, frail, lying in the pile of trash, wrapped in a thin cloth. The baby's tiny hands trembled in the cold, its breath seemed to be choking, and its emaciated body showed no signs of life. Rusty was surprised, stunned by that scene. He couldn't understand why such a small creature was abandoned so cruelly, but he didn't have time to think for long. The instinct to protect surged strongly within him. Even though he couldn't take care of himself, even though he didn't have the strength to do anything, Rusty knew that this baby was in danger, possibly not surviving without immediate help. A conflict within him began to arise. Rusty understood that he was not capable of taking care of the baby. He was too old, his health was failing, unable to care for a tiny being, but he also couldn't abandon the baby to this cruel fate. The feeling of helplessness surrounded him, and deep in his heart, Rusty wondered if he had the strength to save a tiny life, if he could do anything without a home, without anyone to help. However, despite everything, something within him could not be extinguished. Even without the abilities that humans possess, Rusty understands that he cannot turn a blind eye. He has to do something. The baby's life, though small and fragile, can change, can be saved, if Rusty has enough courage and love to act. And no matter how many difficulties he had to face, Rusty was determined not to give up. Rusty stood there, eyes fixed on the newborn baby in the pile of trash, heart pounding and breath quickening. Even though his body was weak, his old legs weary after many years of hardship, in that moment Rusty no longer felt tired or in pain. He couldn't let a small creature endure another moment in this tragic circumstance. With the resilience of a loyal friend, Rusty bent down, carefully pulling the baby out of the pile of trash. His hands were unsteady, but each of his movements was filled with gentleness and care. Rusty gasped as he tried to lift the baby, feeling the fragility of that life in his hands. Rusty's short hair and sparse fur were drenched in the night dew, but in his eyes there was only one goal: to bring the baby to safety. Rusty knew that he couldn't take care of himself, and taking care of a child was beyond his capabilities. But deep in his heart, he understood that no matter how difficult it was, if he didn't act right now, there would be no more chances. Each of his steps was heavy, but full of determination. He must find someone. He must find a place where the baby can be helped. The streets of Oakbrook in the dark night seemed endless, but Rusty kept walking persistently. He had passed through here countless times, familiar with every corner, every house, but now everything seemed blurred. He could only focus on the baby in his arms, listening to each weak breath, feeling the numbing cold from that fragile body. Finally, when they reached Margaret's house, a retired nurse living in a small house near the end of the street, Rusty collapsed, his head gently resting on the doorstep, exhausted but without a hint of hesitation. Margaret, although retired, is still the only person in town that Rusty knows can help. The door opened, and upon seeing the scene before her, Margaret's eyes immediately became tense. But she did not hesitate. She hurriedly took the baby from Rusty's hands, bringing it into the house where there was warm light and the care of someone knowledgeable. Rusty stood outside, not daring to enter, just looking through the window. He didn't know whether the baby would survive or not, but in his heart, a sense of peace arose. No matter the outcome, he did the right thing. You did not give up. You did not stand still watching the baby face death without anyone by their side. With sacrifice and unconditional love, Rusty did everything he could, and no matter how cruel fate may be, he knows that in this moment he has accomplished something great, protecting the life of a small being, not with strength or power, but with a loyal and steadfast heart. Margaret is an elderly woman with deep wrinkles etched on her face, each line a mark of a long life lived. She lives in a small charming house, quiet yet full of warmth, where floral, upholstered chairs and an old blanket are an indispensable part of life. Although she has been retired for a long time, Margaret still cannot give up her work of caring for others. The nursing profession is not just a job, it is a lifelong mission for her, a part of her heart, a part of her life that she dedicates entirely to those in need of help. For a long time, she has taken care of the sick in the neighborhood by herself, even though no one asked, and no one ever said thank you. For her, every life, whether big or small, deserves care and respect. When she heard the knock on the door and saw Rusty standing there, she didn't need to think for long. Although Rusty is not a person, in her eyes that dog has something familiar, full of care and love. And when she saw the baby in Rusty's hands, her heart tightened. A tiny, fragile being, so delicate that a gentle breeze could sweep it away, abandoned in the cold winter night. Margaret did not hesitate, her hands quickly bringing the baby into her arms with careful yet decisive movements. She knew that no matter how weak the baby was, the chance of survival would depend on timely intervention. She called for an ambulance immediately, not wasting a single precious moment. The emergency call echoed in the room, with worry and tension in every word, but also with the hope, however small, that the baby would be saved. But deep down in Margaret's heart, an internal conflict is taking place. Although she knew she could help, she also couldn't ignore a hard-to-accept truth. She no longer had the strength and energy to bear this great responsibility. Her hands had weakened over the years, and the aches in her back and knees had become a part of her life. She was no longer the young nurse full of health and agility. The worries and anxieties about her ability to care for the baby, about what she could do while the life of this tiny being is in critical condition, filled her mind. But despite those fears, a part of Margaret's heart remained steadfast. She understood that even though she was getting older and her body was weakening, love did not always wait for physical strength. She will do whatever she can, no matter how small, to help the baby, because in these moments, only assistance can bring a chance of survival to a life that Rusty has brought. And even though the doubts about her abilities might tear at her heart, Margaret did not give up. She decided to do everything possible because in this moment, she understood that love is never measured by age or strength, but by determination and patience. When the baby was brought to the hospital, the doctors quickly took all emergency measures to save the life of that tiny being. Despite the critical condition, their dedicated care seemed to bring a glimmer of hope. After a long, tense night, the doctors decided to name the baby Hope, as a symbol of faith in survival, a sign that even in the darkest of times, a glimmer of light can still be found. That simple name is like a prayer, an encouragement that even though the baby knows nothing about this world, it can still have a future. Hope became a name that not only signifies life, but also conveys a message of humanity, of life in moments that seem utterly hopeless. However, within the Oak Brook community, the story of the abandoned baby has caused a wave of commotion. The residents of the small town were left in shock by this heartbreaking incident. They cannot understand why such a small being was treated so cruelly. They wondered who the parents were that abandoned the baby, and why an innocent life had to endure such coldness. The community, once accustomed to peace and unity, now feels torn apart by unanswered questions. Some people have begun to question society's responsibility towards abandoned children, the child protection system, and those who cannot take good care of their children. The discussions and conversations about how to help struggling families suddenly became lively. The story of hope is not just a personal tragedy, but a reminder that the community must take responsibility for the vulnerable beings, the children who cannot protect themselves. But amidst the sadness and anger, a small glimmer of hope was born. People began to reassess their roles in society. They understand that each individual, whether a human or a dog like Rusty, can make a difference. The Oak Brook community, instead of being divided by futile questions, gradually found a way to unite, to protect the vulnerable, the innocent lives that need care and love. In the dark night, the name Hope is not just the name of an abandoned baby, but also a beacon illuminating people's hearts. A wordless message about the necessity of love, responsibility, and faith in good things. And from that moment on, Rusty was no longer just a stray dog, but a loyal friend and unsung hero who brought hope to an entire community. Hope's condition quickly became serious. The doctors diagnosed that the baby had a rare congenital heart disease, a condition where the chances of survival without surgery are almost zero. That was a devastating blow to all who had cared for and hoped for the life of that tiny baby. The doctors said that surgery was the only option, but Hope's condition was too weak to undergo it immediately. Every hour that passes, her chances of survival decrease a little more. Margaret, who had cared for Hope from the very first moments, felt a wave of anxiety rising in her heart. She knew that there was nothing more she could do than pray and watch over the baby throughout the treatment process. As an elderly nurse, she understands the fragility of life very well, but she also knows that in this case, the only thing she can do is continue to be by Hope's side, providing her with the love and care she can offer. However, thoughts about Hope's future always haunt her, the unanswered questions about whether she can overcome this challenge or not. At the same time, the entire Oak Brook community could not escape the anxiety. The townspeople, who had followed the story of the abandoned baby and witnessed Rusty's sacrifice, now continue to watch with a tense mindset. Everyone is afraid that Hope's story will end in tragedy. That small community, though always united, now feels helpless. They knew they could do nothing to change the situation, except send their prayers and hope for a miracle. Rusty, although he couldn't fully understand what was happening to the baby he had saved, could sense Hope's weakness and pain. He couldn't do anything but lie beside the hospital bed. his sincere eyes staring at the little girl, as if wanting to impart a bit of strength and hope to her. He was no longer a stray dog in the community. In this moment, Rusty is Hope's most loyal friend, a silent protector, always there, quietly and persistently. Both Margaret and Rusty, despite feeling helpless, did not abandon Hope. Even though they knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, they still did not abandon her. Love and sacrifice have brought them together in the most difficult moments, and this is the strength they can offer to Hope. The Oakbrook community, although lacking the medical or financial power to save the baby, provided emotional support, encouragement, and love to Hope and Mrs. Margaret's family, which was also an important part of the fight to bring the little girl back to life. In that moment, all fears and doubts seemed to be pushed back by one thing: resilience that never gives up. Hope's surgery began on an early morning when the atmosphere in the hospital became unusually tense. Dr. Reeves, who had over 20 years of experience in cardiac surgery, stood firm under the pressure of this critical operation. He is the only one whom everyone trusts to be able to save Hope, but even he is not sure about the outcome. However, the determination in the doctor's eyes and the steadiness of his hands made everyone feel somewhat reassured. Rusty, although just a stray dog, his presence in the hospital during these crucial moments is truly remarkable. He sat quietly outside the operating room, his anxious eyes fixed on the door as if sensing every breath of hope. Although he could do nothing more than stand there, Rusty remained a symbol of sacrifice and unconditional loyalty. Margaret, who had accompanied Hope from the very first moments, sat beside him, also full of worry. She could feel the tension spreading in the air, but she also kept praying for a miracle. Time passes slowly, as if each minute on the clock is weighed down. The community's worries are gradually spreading. The people of Oakbrook, who had loved Rusty and always worried about Hope's fate, gathered outside the hospital, sending their blessings and wishes for a good outcome. They knew that this was not just Hope's battle, but everyone's, a fight between life and death, between hope and despair. In the operating room, Dr. Reeves and the nurses worked tirelessly, their hands moving in a fluid rhythm, all for a single goal: to save the frail little girl lying on the operating table. The sounds of life support machines, the steady beeping of the heart monitor, all blend into a tense yet hopeful atmosphere. A moment that seemed to stretch on forever, and then finally, after hours, Dr. Reeves stood up, his face weary but his eyes shining with relief. The surgery was successful, he sighed in relief, his eyes unable to hide his joy. Hope it will be fine. When this news reached outside the operating room, a wave of relief and joy spread. Those waiting in the hallway could not contain their joy. Meanwhile, Rusty stood up, wagging his tail gently, as if sensing the great change as well. Margaret hugged the old dog, tears streaming down her face. She knew that this journey was not over yet, but this was an important turning point. The next day, when Hope woke up after the surgery, Mrs. Margaret sat beside the bed, holding the little girl's small hand. The little girl was weak, but gradually regaining her strength, her eyes sparkling as she looked around. Hope's recovery is not only a medical miracle, but also a testament to the invisible power of love and sacrifice. Everyone, from Rusty, Margaret, to the Oakbrook community, felt that it was love and solidarity that created this miracle. In the days that followed, Hope not only recovered physically, but also became a symbol of hope and survival. The love that everyone has shown for the little girl not only gave her strength, but also brought hope to the entire community. And throughout that process, Rusty, the old dog full of loyalty, was always by her side, a silent friend who protected, witnessed, and participated in this miraculous journey. After months of challenges, Zoe gradually regained her confidence and determination. Returning to school, she began to face the challenges that had previously made her feel helpless. The lessons became more meaningful when Zoe was no longer alone. She began to understand that, although her past had deep wounds, she could start anew for Hope. Every morning, when Zoe holds Hope in her arms, she feels the joy from the love she has for her child. Zoe's growth is not only reflected in her learning how to be a mother, but also in her struggle against herself to not give up, even though there were times she felt scared and helpless. Zoe is no longer the hesitant young girl, worried about responsibilities. She has become a strong and determined mother, ready to sacrifice everything to protect her daughter. The joy in Hope's eyes whenever Zoe smiles is an invaluable source of motivation, helping her stand firm like never before. Every day that passes, Zoe realizes one thing: love is the greatest strength to heal old wounds. At the same time, Margaret also made a big decision in her life. After months of witnessing Rusty's dedication and unconditional loyalty, she could not let the old dog wander alone. Margaret adopted Rusty, and from then on, he became an indispensable part of her family. Not just a silent companion, Rusty has now become a symbol of hope and sacrifice. His footsteps, though slower with the passage of time, still warm each morning for the family. Margaret also felt happy when she realized that even though she was retired, she could still continue to contribute to the community, helping the sick and especially Hope. She returned to her work, caring for patients, bringing with her all the love and care she had given to Hope during those difficult months.